Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Well, hello, my constant listeners, my semi-listeners, and my brand new listeners. Welcome to another podcast with us. I have been requested to talk about deer. So I thought, well, why not? So we're going to talk about deer today, and we're going to discuss some of the things that deer has meant to me through the years. And I hope that this gives you some illumination or some differences, what to work with, or how to see the spirit kin deer if you happen to work with deer. So without further ado, I'll start chatting with you. Look at me rhyming and stuff. The deer for me is the very first spirit kin that I ever encountered. It was the very first spirit kin power animal that came to me during my very first journey, oh so many years ago. Most of you, some of you, maybe not you, will know the story, but there are aspects to the story of deer that perhaps we have not considered as we've worked together, talked together, moved together in the journey. When I first met the deer, it was pitch white, and I saw a herd of white deer. At that point in time, I didn't know how to interpret a white deer. I was given a set of oracle cards or animal cards for the Druid Speak, I think they're called. And in that deck of cards was the first time I had seen a representation of a hind or the deer. And it was white, and in that particular piece of information, it referred to the stag, the white hind, as being the being of the goddess, which I found very interesting, because at that point in my life, and even still now, I don't work with, and I'm not really called to work with, goddess energy per se, like individual goddess energy. Anyway, that's a whole other tangent that we're not really getting on today. I learned very much from deer. I learned the beauty of deer. I learned the gentleness of deer. I learned the swiftness of deer, the silence of deer. I had a very special place in my heart prior to this journey, or prior to the exploration of shamanism, when I was a young girl and spent much time on the farmland. There were many deer, white-tailed as well as mule deer, and very, very rarely you would see a set of small deer, baby deer, who were a mixture of the whitetail and the mule deer, it was a very interesting crossbreed. Anyway, again, not the point of the story. So for me, I had many wonderful encounters with deer through my childhood, especially when you're horseback riding. I found that I could come upon a deer and the deer wouldn't startle or run, because it smelt my horse and didn't smell me, or it heard a four-legged animal and therefore didn't see me. I did not hunt deer because my father was not a hunter. My grandfather was an avid hunter, and I did go hunting with him when I was a young girl, but we went hunting for moose. But what I didn't know then, but I know now, is that moose is actually a member of the deer family. And I have a strong love for moose, not only because it is an absolutely awkward animal, but because I also encountered moose in my childhood. The deer for me, as I watch them from the back of my horse or from the trees as they nibbled on the fresh shoots of newly planted crops, I was always in awe of their silence. I was in awe of their tranquility, and I was really impressed by their hyper-awareness. Because they are prey animals, they have a hyper-awareness that predator animals have, but in a different way. I think that the deer, in teaching its gentleness to me, I think it also taught me how to be comfortable being a prey. I think from that perspective, what I mean is that in my childhood and in my early adulthood, I often felt that I was not the one who was in power and gave away my power, had my power taken away. And in that, the deer taught me how to be aware of my environment and keep myself safe, even as I saw myself as a prey, or as, not as a victim, because I never felt like I was a victim, but I certainly felt that I was powerless at times. Using my eyes, using my ears, and working on my other senses allowed me the opportunity to become comfortable in my environment. Whereas prior to working with deer and prior to working with shamanism, I didn't necessarily feel that there was much comfort or safety in my environment. Indeed, really any environment. The deer taught me the gentleness of femininity. That was something also that I really had not accessed in my life, was gentleness or femininity. I believe that in working with such a beautiful spirit as the deer, I was able to accept some of the parts of myself that were jagged or tangled or anxious or had anxiety. And the deer was able to teach me how to keep myself upright, keep myself strong, and keep myself alive in situations that I was unfamiliar with, or situations that were not particularly safe, or even situations that were emotionally unsafe for me. And I believe that working with the deer helped me to literally run off some of the excess psychic energy that I had accumulated and stuffed for many years. The opportunity to work with deer also gave me the opportunity to explore one of the fundamental lessons in my spirit walk that I've ever had, which is you never leave anyone behind. And I know that that also is a phrase that comes from war and war movies, but I didn't understand until I was doing a particularly intense journey, and I was traveling with deer and with another power animal, and we had to jump over a chasm, and I made it across, and the four-legged other animal that was with me made it across, but my deer fell down 1,000 meters to the bottom of the crevice of the cavern, and I was absolutely devastated that I had lost my deer, and so devastated, in fact, that I hopped on my email lists of, those old lists that you had. I know some of you don't know very much about that because, you've been around since the time of Facebook, but that certainly wasn't in my world in those days. So this is the one groups. This is the Yahoo mail groups. This is those mail groups. Anyway, beside the story. It was a group of people who had been shamanic practitioners, such as myself, for a long period of time, who had taken on a teaching role and who had studied through the Foundation of Shamanic Studies. So we all spoke a particular vernacular, a particular lexicon when we discussed shamanism. Since then, my language has definitely broadened, but Why I'm saying that is because when I told the group of people what had happened, some of them piped up, and voices that I really respected. Carol Proudfoot Edgar, for one, was definitely one of the voices that spoke up. And Karen Kelly from the UK, who I have great respect for and has certainly been working through this work for many, many years. The idea given to me was that you never leave a power animal behind. And when you leave a power animal behind, or if they are wounded or if they're sick, it's a test as to how committed you are to them, how committed you are to the work, and so on and so forth. One of the suggestions that was given to me at that time was to perform what is called a spirit canoe. And in the center of the spirit canoe, that I would travel to the place where I had left and the place where my deer had fallen. I didn't end up doing a spirit canoe for various reasons, none of which really matter at this point in time. But the spirit canoe that happened for me was I traveled into the place where I had lost deer. And I remember at that point in time praying to the spirits to help me to bring deer home, and how incredibly sorry that I was that I had left deer behind. And what ended up happening was a net of stars was built. And I remember helping to weave the stars, kind of like Nanabushu, the grandmother spider who helps to weave in reality. As we wove, we created a net out of the stars, and we wove it, and it went down and further down and further down and further down, and I was able to ride on the stars in this net down to the bottom of the cavern, and I was able to get deer, put deer into the netting, and then the stars pulled us back up, and then I was able to work with deer, bring deer back to life. And quote unquote, because it is a power animal. It does live in the spirit world. It's not as though I'm going to kill it or it's going to die. It is energy, but that you all understood what I meant. However, the relationship then with deer became very different, and the gentleness of the deer was still there, but I had learned and had grown a deeper understanding of the relationship between the human world and the spirit world. And it isn't that we are not separated, but it is also that we are not separated. What I mean by that is we have been taught to believe that we are here and the spirit world is over there. I think that comes from the Christian mythology or the overculture of Christianity. Regardless of what nation that you live in, most of us have been under the thumb of Christianity for many years. So or whatever tradition you have, there is generally the idea that a spirit is out there or up there or separated from us and is in separation from us. Therefore, we have no direct communication with. We have no direct relationship with. So in practicing neo-shamanism or modern shamanism, such as yourself, what you're learning and what you've already know and what you're strengthening is your ability not to believe that spirit is up there over there, but spirit is right here, right beside me, which I can access and I can have relationship with at any point in time. Creating a apparatus, a netting, a webbing in order to get the power animal back for me and to get deer back for me. It deepened that relationship because I knew how related and how dependent we were therefore upon each other. So when I would travel through the East, and when I started my journey, I was east on the medicine wheel, east because it was such a new thing, not east because east because I was just coming into adulthood. Even though I had 2 small children, I had to do a lot of growing up into adulthood. It's different when you're single and an adult than when you are a single parent and an adult. There's a different type of singleness to that. The relationship with the deer and myself at that point in time also helped me to be more compassionate and to understand fears that my children would express, or fears or imaginations that my children would express that I may have missed if I hadn't been working with such a gentle spirit. I didn't grow up in a very gentle way, and I wasn't loved in a very gentle way with my children's father. And so I didn't really understand the gentle way. So the deer for me really became the teacher of the gentle way, really became the teacher of East. So the lightness of being, the illumination, the awakening of self, the awakening to self, the awakening on the wheel, the awakening of the mid to young self, the awakening to the other world. Not that I was ever closed to the other world, but it became a legitimate and solid practice to become involved with the other world. The deer also taught me that not only did I have a prey mentality, but many of us have a prey mentality. And we are taught, I think, to believe that safety resides outside of us. So safety resides in an authority figure. Safety resides in the weapons we have. Safety resides within the self-defense or whatever method of that you're imploring safety to come visit you. I think it would behoove us to remember that we too have safety within us. But I believe that the prey mentality of the overculture has taught us to, to move in one direction that we are told to move in, or move in a method that we're taught to move in, so on and so forth. What the deer taught me to do was to appear as though I was going with the flow, but then to gently and very quietly, without drawing a lot of attention to myself, go off to the side and wander and graze and learn and explore on my own. And I can be a very vocal and very boisterous and very outgoing person. I also have my very quiet, very introspective, very shy mannerisms. But the deer was able to give me opportunities to explore and to appreciate both the parts of me that could live with the herd and the parts of me that want to lay off on my own, find a nice thicket to lay in and gather the warmth of the woods around me so that I didn't feel the coldness of the other natural world, the outside world. Deer are one of the creatures that are found all over the world. I believe the only places where deer were not originally was Australia. I know had no deer. I believe there was one deer or two type of deer in Africa. One very famous archaeological dig is the Red Deer Cave I think it is in Central Africa. It's a very old cave. It's a ritualistic cave dedicated to deer. Deer have been in many mythologies. They're in many, many stories. They're in creator stories. They're believed to be the creatrix beings. So in working with East, you can see how the deer is an aspect of that. Working with East on the medicine wheel for me was important. I am experiencing the awakening of the dawning. Deer taught me to be gentle with other creatures, and that really helped me when I was working with various people who were starting on the path of shamanism, or who I had met during my journey and my explorations of shamanism, even when I was just beginning to learn about it, all the way to when I was fully entrenched in being a teacher. Deer was with me through many years. When I became very involved in the South and the lessons of the South is when deer started to show up less and less in my journeys. The relationship to deer also reminded me of my ancestors, and my ancestors are the Sami people who we are the reindeer herders, and the reindeer are also caribou here. They're very similar, the caribou and the reindeer. I mean, there are differences because different continents and many years apart and generations of genetic alterations to survive in the environment. But we had different relationship to the deer. We ate, so deer in this, where I live in Alberta, deer is very important. I know many people who hunt deer. I personally don't like deer. Even though I'm a vegetarian now, I certainly did eat deer as a young woman. As I mentioned, my grandfather was a hunter. And so I never acquired a taste for it. No matter how I cooked it, I never acquired a taste for it. But every part of the deer was used, and right down to the hooves, the boiling of the hooves, and some of the hooves were used on the dancing garb. The reindeer antler was an important part of the Nawadi, which is the Finnish word for shaman. So the Nawadi would wear, and Nawadi is the female word for shaman, because I'm female. That is who I would be referred to as. Would wear different parts of the deer in their regalia, as well as having representations of the deer on the jacket or on the outer tunic, and the wearing of the deer hooves or the caribou hooves. It, would all depict the various aspects of status, would all depict various aspects of the relationship. So working with the deer really helped me to understand the value of deer within the community. Not only was it used for the meat, the hide is very, very supple and very soft. It could make good buckskin outfits. It was such a versatile leather. And I can usually tell a deer drum from an elk drum by the sound when I hear it in a circle versus the moose hide versus a cow hide drum. They all have very different sounds, and they have very different looks to the tanned hide. So there are many aspects and many ways to use deer. One of the oldest deer, the second oldest but the second largest cave entrance in the world, is in the forests of, I think it is in Borneo. Correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody correct me. No. Anyway, it is called the Deer Cave. You can look it up, and it is called the Deer Cave, and there are thousands of rock paintings of deer, and there are effigies to deer. So we have often seen deer by our ancestors represented in many of the caves. The Deer Cave goes back anywhere between 5,500 and 6,000 BC is when it was created, supposedly, or when the archaeologists can identify how old it is based on that. And I really do like caving, so I have seen some of the different pictures and depictions of animals on the walls, as well as some of the not hieroglyph, because that's Egypt, but some of the rock paintings down in southern Alberta also depict a relationship to deer. And some of the deer depicted on the walls or on the ceilings, some of them can be stick figures, and some of them are drawn out to be absolutely beautiful renditions of an artistic view of the deer. Deer have been used in ceremonies. There are deer masks. You can still see people wearing antlers to this day. We have the size of deer ranging from the moose, and when I was on the Queen Charlotte Islands just in northern BC, the deer there were probably 12 or 14 inches high. They're very, very small. There's the tuft deer, which actually has tusks. They don't have horns, they have tusks. It is believed that the original deer all had tusks, and it was over a period of 30 million years, no time at all really, that the tusks eventually moved into horns, and when the horns became the prominent feature, then genetically the tusks, which then became long incisors, and the incisors were brought in to form with the rest of the teeth that were able to, to chew the grass or chew whatever that the deer was eating at that time, barks and twigs and various things. So where do we want to go? What do I want to say about the deer? Ultimately, I found the deer to be one of the most gentle and awe-inspiring spirit kin that I've worked with. Deer brought me home to myself in so many ways. Deer taught me the value of using all of my senses to stay alive and alert. I think when you are a predator or your energy is more predator than prey, I'm not certain that a predator has less awareness, but perhaps their awareness is in different ways and has different value or listens or senses for different things. Being a prey animal or having a prey animal for your primary power animal is very warming to the self, because there is nothing that you could ever fear from that animal. Dismemberment is highly unlikely. Not that deer are always very nice. I mean, we can all go onto YouTube or Reddit or any number of different sources, media sources, to find images of deers attacking people with their long horns or with their front feet. They can be, when cornered, they can be quite vicious, as they should be, obviously, because they have that opportunity to be so, or otherwise they wouldn't survive from all of these millions of years. If they were so easy prey, then the predators would have certainly killed them out a very long time ago. We have them varying in different sizes, different colors, various shapes. Some of them are extinct and only alive now in zoos. Some of them, like the white-tailed deer here across the prairies, there are so many white-tailed deer that there are probably more licenses to hunt deer than I can count, that's for certain. There are many benefits to learning to see, perceive, feel, smell your environment from a different perspective. It's also taught me how to work with the crowd and how to still be my very own individual self. I am not a crowd follower, as I am certain all sets of ears hearing this are likely to call themselves not crowd followers. So salutations to all of us who are not followers. The deer taught me the ability to shapeshift into being a member of a group and a solitary creature. The deer are very attentive and very aware of their young, so the deer taught me to be aware and more attentive and gentler with my young. The deer taught me to watch the signs and symbols of the sun, because I was more of a nocturnal person, but the deer are very much not nocturnal and are awake at sunrise and sunset. Those are some of the best times to watch deer. I noticed when I was a young woman and riding my horse, I would see far more of them if I went out in the early morning than I would in the heat of the day, because they were smart and went into the bushes. Where would I be without the deer? I don't know if I would be on this path. I certainly would never have learned about spirit canoes. I never would have learned the invaluable lesson to always know where things were coming from, to know that you don't leave an animal behind. And I just thought about this as I was talking, was that deer was white. And one of the other animals that really changed how I would fight to get a power animal back was a wolf. And in that particular journey, which was very, very challenging on so many levels, that wolf was white too. But white, what I wanted to refer to or talk a little bit about in the beginning, but I got sidetracked. I know, constant listener, you're so shocked that I got sidetracked. But look at me, I'm even coming back to one of my original thoughts. Whoop, whoop, party time. Anyway, that's not. So, anyway, white could also mean or start to symbolize the newness of the path. So the beginning of your journey, or the beginning of a relationship with such and such, or the beginning of the relationship with spirit. And so having a white deer and recognizing that on some of the shamanic journeys or some of the shamanic teachings is that the white is the beginning of the path, and spirit is honoring that you're changing. But then on the other hand, I am told that I won't have a snowy owl for a spirit kin until I'm a crone, like for real crone. So not like I'm 50 something right now, but I'm still not a crone. I'm getting older, but spirit says I'm not a crone. So who am I to argue, right? Like, woo, I'm not omniscient and shit, right? So I'm just wee little old me. But I really encourage you to take a look, if you've been doing this for a long period of time, what was your first power animal? What was your relationship? What are some of the fundamental things you have learned? And what if you still have your very first power animal and you've never broke relationship with it? What if that power animal was meant to stay with you forever and ever, amen? I don't have that particular experience, but I also am not at the amen part of my life, so there's a very good chance that something will have stayed with me forever and ever, amen. The deer come in many different colors, from roe red to a tawny color to a deep brown to speckled, to the fawn being speckled, to the doe being so much different than the buck. The female reindeers also grow their horns and their antlers and shed their antlers, much like every other male deer that you can find. The reindeer is one of the few deer species that the female grow and shed the horns, which I find interesting. I don't know the genetic reasoning why, and nor do I really care. But if somebody knows, and I don't care to research that, but if somebody knows or has an idea, you're more than welcome to share it with me. So I hope you have enjoyed my meandering way through the words and the wonders and the wisdoms of the deer. I hope that you, if and when you explore the medicine wheel for yourself, that perhaps you will find deer in the east as one of the illumination beings. Maybe you'll find deer as being one of the gentle moons for you, one of the gentle teachers for you. Maybe you'll find your femininity in the deer. Maybe you'll find grace and agility. Deers are very agile and incredible jumpers, something I never inherited from my deer. I just want to make that very clear to you, constant listener. Jumping is not my forte. So I did not get that gracefulness from the deer. I think from that perspective too, taking great leaps into the spirit world, taking leaps into shamanism, because it was quite a leap for me to go into a rigid practice. Not that shamanism is rigid, but that it was a very rigid practice for me, because I had daily things that I needed to do. I had a practice. I had various things. So deer was there through the fundamentals, through the building of the skeleton, or the putting together of the skeleton of my shamanic self. And from there, learning how to flush and flesh out the reasonings, the depths, the wisdom, the intuition, all of the other things that have come along with walking on the spirit path. And is your relationship with your first power animal, if it is still viable? How many years have you been working together, and how has your relationship deepened and changed, or drifted apart and become aloof? There are so many aspects to deer. There are so many aspects to the relationships that we have and create during the beginning of our walk. There are so many different ways of searching around yourself to find truth, searching around yourself to find mystery. I hope that this has shed a little bit of light on deer and the beautiful creatures that they are. But I spoke primarily from my own experience. I think that is likely the best teacher. And I think that for me, because I've had such a long experience with deer, and such a fundamental one for me, that it was easier for me to talk with you about deer than it would be for me to talk about, somebody has also asked me to do a podcast on Sphinx, but I don't have really personal experience with Sphinx, but I do look forward to journeying to Sphinx and doing some research on Sphinx. But I wanted to talk about the deer from my heart, because it is a very beautiful, wonderful, and amazing gentle spirit for me, one to whom I am forever grateful, one to whom I owe many of my perceptions, and one to whom I owe the most fundamental lesson: never, ever leave your power animal behind. Well, my constant listeners, my semi-listeners, and my brand new listeners, thank you for giving me some of your incredibly valuable time, your ears and your minds and your thoughts. I hope that I have enlightened you from the Eastern perspective of the medicine wheel, the relationship with deer, and until we meet again across the airways, I wish upon you whichever blessings you need, and whatever you don't need, please pass along. See ya.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.